In this workshop, Jonathan Miller, students from the Royal Northern College of Music, and some guest singers will tackle the aria. An aria is a solo sung within the action of an opera.
You know that bit,
Later, a rare aria by Handel. But first, one of the most famous of all arias, from Puccini's Tosca.
What we'll start with, in order to, as it were, show the shape of the thing before we start to blow it up with helium in performance, so that it gets off the ground, we'll start just simply by singing it. Now, you're going to mark most of it. Now, can you explain exactly what you mean by marking?
Because of this piece, down the octave, just because it's quite a big piece, and just to take my time over it, and because it is such a big piece and it's not a good idea to sing it all the time, especially being a young singer, because it is really for a full-blown dramatic soprano. So I'm going to be singing it and marking it, just pacing myself, really.
Sempre con fe sincera la mia preghiera ai santi tabernacoli salì, sempre con fe sincera. Di fiori l'altar, nell'ora del dolore, perché, Signore, perché me ne rimuneri così. Di gioielli della Madonna al manto e diedi il canto agli astri al ciel che ne regnan più belli nell'ora del dolor, perché Signor, perché me ne rimuneri così.
Right. There you are. You see, you worked. I think that... I'll just wipe the tears away for a minute. I think when you're facing out of the window, so that you've got something to do with your hands. One of the great problems always is hands. What do you do with your hands? And I think that often people, when they're meditating sadly or something, I mean, what you started to do is you turned round, running your hand down there. I think when you're looking out, just run your hands just a little bit, just down, just tracing it, as if you can scarcely see beyond there. That's gone out of focus there, and it's just, why? It says, I've been a good girl all my life. I've lived for art. I've always been to church. I've gone to confession. Why suddenly has all this horrible stuff happened to me? Okay?
Yeah, as if you don't realise you're doing it, but you just do it.
That's right, yes, that's right. It's these accessory things that really happen. Because otherwise people always get... They're worrying about where their hands get into all sorts of peculiar positions, and they go into sort of semi-operatic stances, you know. And you find places where you want to sit down.
Because I felt the first time might have been better, but then I would have been stuck there, so
yes,
I need to do
yes. Well, that's why all I want to do is to create a frame for you, a circumstance which you will react to emotionally, so that you feel yourself compelled to sit in certain places. Because if it's imposed upon you in too fixed a way, then it becomes artificial. Already it's beginning to get natural because you were generating it rather than that.
Just feel where the right place. It could be in a different time each time.
Yeah, good. Right. Now, Ashley, when you come to her, you can make it almost, I mean, as near as it can to proper singing, but almost whispered into her ear. Sure. So that it's as if almost you're saying, as if she was standing there, you see what they're doing? They're going to kill those people. You wouldn't like that, would you? Because you're a nice girl. You wouldn't want those very nice men, including your friend, to be killed. You see, as if it's... And you just feel this terrible poison being poured into your ear. Okay? Good. Okay. So, let's do it again.
One little request right at the end, Vanessa, just to suggest a different way of looking at it. When you get to the final remuneri così, it's only a semiquaver, so I wanted you to look at the idea of putting a triple consonant on it. Così. In that way. Yeah, exactly. Just the other way around. I mean, you may choose in the end to revert to your original plan, which is fine, that's your choice, but I make that suggestion. Okay. Also, to say at the very beginning, Jonathan's got this thing which looks wonderful when you're looking out the window. Of course, from my point of view, it's a nightmare. So I'm not going to ask you to change that, but all I'm going to ask you to do to help me accompany you is to give me, again, a sort of triple V into that first V. Remember, the V in Italian is never F, it's very much V. It's a strong sound.
But of course, the thing is, Charles, that if I was doing this on the stage, I would impose that neither on Vanessa nor on you. I would never get a soprano, as it were, to isolate herself first from the audience, and secondly, or perhaps more importantly, from you. But what I would do is to have this window perhaps set at an oblique angle downstage so that she could sing more downstage, or some equivalent to looking out of the window.
But in a funny way, the fact that you are doing it like that now, I find very exciting, and if you did decide in a production that I happen to be doing with you that that's what you wanted, I would go with that because it looks so fantastic. And actually, if we use the technique in the right way and use the quality of the V, then I can accompany that.
Obviously, no conductor would ever permit me to take the diva and face her upstage for one of the most famous arias in the world. And I wouldn't want to do that. It would compromise the thing as a performance.
That's absolutely true. But I mean, all I want to say is that there are ways and means round it, and that's the key. And people, again, forget this thing about, oh, you're probably going to have to look at the conductor all the way through this. Well, it's rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
And in all of this, it's a question of collaborating with conductors. I mean, it's nice to have conductors with whom one can have conversations, rather than... OK, let's try it again.
Sorry, I can't get that note.
That's all right. OK, go on.
So I've learned it with different chords. That's the thing. I'm not good.
Oh, I see. Yeah, just try it through with...
Can I just hear the chords so I can pick it up? I've got a different chord, you see.
You've probably just got a B flat. Yeah. That's your chord, and then...
Yes, that's OK. Almost double dots. There's so many L's on it.
Yeah, it's marvellous.
There's the E flat. And then your E flat.
Right.
OK.
Right, as if I can't
Yeah,
like,
because you're sobbing by that point, absolutely.
Right. As if I can't get it out,
so actually,
rather than...
Exactly, so we hear it, because you can use the triple consonant in that way, so we hear the opening.
Right, I see, right.
Do you see what I mean? It's just a Yeah, it's the closest we actually get to sobbing in music, really.
Oh, right, so it's...
Yeah.
before use the cosy as if I'm going to sob, so I am going to say it, but I'm delaying it.
And just be freer as well. Tabernacoli, Sari, places like that. Really pull it forward and we'll catch you up. You know, there's a tremendous excitement about that where the vocal line actually becomes divorced from the orchestra. That's when you really feel like you're making music on stage, when you're down in the pit, and you can hear the soprano in this case just taking the law into her own hands and ebbing and flowing, and you follow her and then you meet again, and then off she goes again. That's the thrill of Puccini for me, like no other composer. Great.
Udi il tamburo s'avvia, guida la scorta ultima condannati. Il tempo passa, sai quale scur'opera laggiù si compia. Là si drizzan patibolo. Per tuo voler non resta che un'ora di vita.
Lovely. I just wanted to talk a little bit, though, about the difference between what we've heard you sing. You've just sung a monologue, an aria, which was prompted by something, a situation in which you find yourself, an intolerable, painful situation, and the song is the expression of something which is part of a dramatic scene. Now, you're going to sing a song which is a freestanding recitation, as it were, which is like a poem. And I sometimes think that arias bear the same relationship to songs as poems do to speeches.
All right.
That a poem can stand on its own. You expect to recite, say, Wordsworth lines on Westminster Bridge or famous bits of recitation, Keats or whatever, and they're freestanding poems. In the same way, what you're about to do is a freestanding song which explains itself. But since we don't know German, perhaps you could explain what it is you're going to be saying by means of this song.
Okay, well, du denkst mit einem Fädchen. The singer is saying, you think that with a little thread that you're going to catch me, and that with one glance that I'm going to fall in love with you. But I'll have you know that I've had many people in high places fall for me, and don't trust me, and you probably see me laugh at you. I am in love, but not with you.
So it is addressed to a someone?
Yes.
It's not in that sense like a poem by Keats or Wordsworth, which is the poet speaking. It's in the voice of a fictional person, addressing a fictional person, but the fictional person doesn't need to be present in order to get the song on its feet.
Yes.
So it's addressed to someone who, in fact, might be all of us in the audience.
Yes.
Whereas...
I think in a song like this, you can be anybody you want, and you're telling that story either through the composer or yourself, but you're telling it, whereas in an aria situation in opera, you are that person. You're not like, I'm not Vanessa in that, I am that character, and you have to be that character through the aria by expressing her emotions at that time, whereas in a song you can do different things with it.
But it's a sort of halfway house, this song, because there is a fictional person being represented, and also a fictional person is being addressed, where there are songs which don't presuppose that you are being someone or that you are talking to someone. They're just perhaps laments or meditations on something or an account of a scene, how beautiful it is. But here, it's sort of halfway, in a way, between an opera, except that we don't have to know who the fictional person is that you're speaking, nor do we have to know who you as a fictional person are.
Yes.
But you're representing someone invented by the composer. Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. Du denkst mit einem Fädchen mich zu fangen, mit einem Blick schon mich verliebt zu machen. Ich find schon andere, die sich schwangen. Du darfst mir ja nicht trauen, siehst du mich lachen. Schon andere find ich, glaube sicherlich. Ich bin verliebt, doch eben nicht in dich. Ich bin verliebt, doch eben nicht in dich.
So, in fact, your eyes were fixed on a someone.
I suppose it was, yeah.
Yes.
Without thinking.
But nevertheless, it's not an aria. It isn't something which, in fact, we have to understand the scene that's gone before. One doesn't need an announcer coming onto the platform and giving a biographical sketch as to what's led to this.
Something I always think is quite interesting is, does it go through your mind when you're singing a song whether it's the composer speaking or not, or are you speaking to the composer?
I think the composers responded to the poem, and if I'm going to do my job properly, I'm not going to get in the way. And Mary Lou, have got nothing to do with it.
But you have got something to do with it, in that Mary Lou is playing a girl who is addressing a phantom lover.
Okay, yes.
So that you are impersonating someone, but it's not necessary...
I've not invented it.
No, you've not invented it. No, of course, in every case, there is a poet or a songwriter or a composer who's invented it. But in this particular case, he's invented a person who you are impersonating, but in order to get the song to stand freely, you don't have to know that.
Of course, it could be him singing, because he did die of syphilis in the end, so... Yes.
This is one of those many operas that Handel wrote, filled with the most improbable plots.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the most elaborate and circuitous plots, taking place in some strange historic limbo. This takes place in Lombardy in the 7th century, as if one cared.
That's right, it gives you some great names there, doesn't it? So,
yes, they have these extraordinary names, and the characters themselves are curiously interchangeable, and there is a sense in which almost all the arias have got this modular character and could, in fact, be lifted out on a crane lift and lowered into another opera and would be just as relevant to the piece in which they find themselves.
And of course, that often happened anyway, because Handel was such a vicious little borrower of his own material. You find arias cropping up virtually without any notes changed in all sorts of different unlikely places. Something from the Messiah will suddenly appear in Xerxes or whatever it may be.
Yes, the actual subject matter which is addressed in the aria contains no references to the details of the plot or to anything which could be recognized as the character himself. Right. But what we have to do, of course, in the opera is to actually make it look as if some one named person means what he's singing, and that the meaning is in some way related to inner thoughts, which, as I say, is something which probably never happened in the performances, because people merely awaited the countertenor aria, although, of course, there were no countertenors in those days. You simply had to go around with your masculinity seriously jeopardized.
The job description is slightly less exacting nowadays.
That's right.
Presumably, also, Jonathan, in terms of your role, it's more difficult because so often, as is the case with this aria, that there's virtually no text. It's basically one phrase that keeps coming back and back and back. Yeah. It's not like we're moving forwards in any sense.
It's one sentence for the whole of the A section, isn't it? It's just different clause.
Well, now, could you explain the one thing which I found very difficult to understand when I first got into opera, and I came into opera from the theatre and not with a musical training, and was very puzzled by this mysterious thing called the da capo aria. Now, tell me, Robin, what is a da capo aria?
A da capo aria is an A-B-A section musically, and
what does that mean exactly?
Right, so you have one melody, one tune in the A section, completely different melody, and often, in fact, contrasting as well in sentiment. And then at the end of the B section, this new section, you repeat the A section, and in this tradition, usually with ornament and embellishment, in order to give a new view to the A section. So it's almost an A-dash section, almost not a different section.
But presumably the purpose of that repetition is to demonstrate the virtuosity of the singer.
It's specifically a vocal form, really. And it was one of Handel's problems as well, in that when he was doing his operas, he found that the English public, who he was writing his operas for later on in his life, didn't really like all this. You know, as they got more and more used to it, they didn't like the idea of having Italian singers coming and literally just showing off their vocal prowess. And so eventually he found that the popularity waned, and he ended up having to write oratorios, and things like the Beggar's Opera were really the knife in the back, really.
Do you think the English, above all, were suspicious of castratos coming and singing? And
well, it's not very surprising, really, I think, because we didn't live with the tradition as long as they did in Italy. And so we had this choral tradition with male altos, who were a rather dodgy species at the time anyway, and so when Handel had to use a male alto, he did so incredibly unwilling.
There's that great story of Alfred Deller, who was obviously largely responsible for bringing the Purcellian countertenor back into, certainly to the English musical world, if not the world at large. And apparently he met a German lady shortly after he'd started this big revival, who said to him, "Ah, you are eunuch, Herr Deller." And he said, "I think you mean unique, madam."
Okay, well, what we'll start with is just simply sing it through without any acting at all. just concentrating on the voice, and just take us through and break off and tell us where the sections are so that we know what the anatomy of this very peculiar form of aria is. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Right.
That's the end of the A section.
That's the end of the A section.
And you can hear the same material being played out in the orchestra.
And this is the great problem for the director.
Exactly,
what do you do?
That's right, orchestral play out.
I mean, if you were singing a concert, you would...
Just stand there, absolutely,
or play idly with the aspidistra.
B section.
B section now, right.
Si salvo il mio Signore, altro non brama il cuore, e pace allora avrò, e pace allora avrò. Si salvo il mio Signore, altro non brama il cuore, e pace allora avrò. E pace allora avrò.
This is the da capo now, the A section.
This is the,
yeah, this is the repeat now. So you get the same orchestral introduction, which is quite a long one in this case.
Now, presumably in the original, the audience would have been turning to each other and saying...
Well, that was quite nice.
Not bad.
Right, yeah.
I wonder what he'll do with the da capo section.
Absolutely,
yes.
yeah. We've
now got to make that as if it were convincingly part of a drama, and do something which I'm sure Handel didn't require of the singers.
Absolutely not.
I mean, it's quite clear that what he wanted was the singer to step forward, to sing it presumably in a posture which was rather rhetorical.
And very stylized
and
as well.
very stylized indeed. But it's a stylization which we find quite hard to accept. I mean, in spite of the fact that we've accepted the return to authentic music with authentic instruments and so forth, we somehow recoil at the idea of authentic recreation of stage gestures. I don't know why that should be, why there should be that dissociation.
Certainly Handel's audience as well would have recognised the gestures, and part of the skill was holding the gesture in a graceful pose, and that's something that modern audiences just aren't ready for, or in a way they're not prepared for. They don't see it every day on the stage, so when it does happen they think, oh, this is something a bit different.
So we're really, as it were, hijacking the music and putting it to slightly different uses.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's wrong. I mean, it's just part of the afterlife of almost any work of art.
No, and I think the pieces were definitely composed to be popular. I mean, Handel was very concerned with being a popular composer, and changed his output to reflect that. So I think he would have been glad if we could have brought it to be a success today.
Well, let's try and repopularize it by doing the scene. Now, what's happened in the scene is that you have been given a key to the prison in which the usurped king has been cast in custody.
Yes.
And the sister of the usurped king, Edwige, who has been apparently a villain up till that time, has presented you with the key to the dungeon, which will enable the usurped king to escape and exact his revenge on the usurper.
Hooray.
So that we have where we come in is simply the moment at which there's been a dialogue between Edwige and you, and she delivers you the key.
That's right.
Now, if we can do that over here, let's assume that that this confidential exchange has taken place out of earshot.
Yes, very much over the shoulder.
Very much over the shoulder, and there's a feeling that this has been, as it were, in a palace where walls have ears, and that you have given this key to him, and then we use that long introduction in ways which Handel would not have felt required, or Handel's performers would not have felt required to fill out. We've got to fill it out dramatically. So what you're going to have to do is to stay here as Edwige, listening to him, and I think probably that what should happen is that you can leave, I think, in the introduction to the Da Capo. It's as if you've heard him say that. You can watch him meditate on the subject and know, in fact, that he will then take advantage of the key that you've given him. So, but stay listening to him in the doorway, having given him the key, okay?
Until the Da Capo.
Until the Da Capo, until the introduction to the Da Capo, and then you can slip away with one look over your shoulder.
Yeah.
And then we know that you're going elsewhere in the palace.
Yeah.
So, again, a posture which I'm sure Handel would never have seen on his stage, to see a singer actually leaning. I wonder if it would be possible to use this trestle. Could you sing leaning?
I could try.
Is it, I mean, again,
fine.
if it compromises the diaphragm in any way, say, yeah, no, there, it's stable. And you can pull away from it.
Yeah.
And meditate.
Yes.
Okay, so should we try a go-through with the introduction so that... so we start with... we'll start with a silent thing, as if, in fact, there's been this moment at which you've given him the key, so we'll start with that, okay? done, Robin.
Soletto i diti remota via predonato o poi caduto in ti come previsto penser da qui alla realtà ci si scoprì